Recently, radio monitors began reporting unusual activity on 7910 kilohertz. According to those reports, the signal appeared to be a number station, possibly linked to the Iranian regime. Then came the follow-up. Listeners reported that the transmission was being jammed. A few days later, Fox News reported that the West Coast had been placed on alert for possible drone strikes. So what are we actually looking at here? Is this just another strange shortwave transmission? Or are we seeing an old intelligence tool showing up in a very modern threat environment? A number station is one of the oldest and most fascinating methods of covert communication still in use. These stations transmit strings of numbers, letters, tones, or digital bursts over shortwave radio. To the average listener, it sounds like nonsense. But to the intended recipient, it may be a coded message. Historically, number stations have been associated with intelligence services, covert networks, and one-way communication to agents in the field. And that one-way feature is important. The receiver does not have to transmit anything back. They only need to listen. That means no return signal, no obvious digital footprint, and very little for an adversary to trace in real time. That is one reason this old technology still matters. In a world dominated by satellites, encrypted apps, and cyber tools, shortwave radio still offers something unique. It is simple. It is global. It is anonymous to receive. And it can work when more modern systems are monitored, disrupted, or denied. Now let's talk about the reported signal on 7910 kilohertz. The claim from radio monitoring circles is that this was not random chatter. It was reportedly structured, repeated, and consistent with the kind of transmission pattern people associate with a number station. Then came the report that it was being jammed. Jamming is exactly what it sounds like. Someone deliberately transmits interference to make the original signal harder to hear or decode. That interference can sound like noise, buzzing, tones, distortion, or overlapping audio. And when jamming shows up, that tells us something important. It suggests that somebody believed the transmission mattered. Now, that does not automatically prove the content of the message, and it does not prove a direct connection to any operational event, but it does raise the stakes, because a jammed signal is no longer just radio curiosity. It becomes part of a contest, someone transmitting, someone listening, and someone else trying to stop the message from getting through. That is classic Tradecraft territory. So where did drones enter the conversation? This is where people need to be careful. There's a difference between analysis and speculation. A number station transmission by itself does not prove a coming attack. And public reporting about drone alerts by itself does not prove a connection to shortwave activity. Those are two separate facts. But it is reasonable to ask whether an old-school covert communication method could still have relevance in a world of unmanned systems. The answer is yes, at least in theory. A coded shortwave transmission could be used for authentication, activation, timing, verification, or coordination. Not necessarily to steer a drone like a remote control airplane, but possibly to cue people, systems, or networks connected to a larger operation. That is why this story is interesting. It sits right at the intersection of legacy intelligence methods and emerging threats. Cold War communication methods, modern asymmetric tactics, and the uncomfortable reality that old tools do not disappear just because newer ones exist. They often survive because they still work. Another important point here is that civilian radio hobbyists and signal monitors are often the first people to notice unusual activity. That may sound surprising, but open source monitoring communities have been documenting strange signals, covert broadcasts, and interference patterns for years. Sometimes they catch things early, sometimes they misread what they are hearing, but either way they are watching parts of the spectrum that most people ignore, and in stories like this, that matters. Because the radio spectrum is still a battlefield, not always in an overt military sense, but in an intelligence sense, in a surveillance sense, and sometimes in a warning sense. If the reports about the transmission on 7910 kilohertz are accurate, and if the jamming reports are also accurate, then the bigger takeaway is not that we can suddenly decode the message. We can't, at least not from the outside. The bigger takeaway is that somebody thought this transmission was important enough to send, and somebody else may have thought it was important enough to interfere with. That alone makes it worth paying attention to. Whether this turns out to be routine intelligence signaling, psychological messaging, or something tied to a broader security concern, it is a reminder of how intelligence tradecraft really works. It is layered, it is ambiguous, and it often hides in plain sight. So when you hear a strange voice reading numbers on shortwave radio, it may sound like a relic from another era, but in reality, it may be something much more current and much more relevant. If you follow investigations, intelligence tradecraft, surveillance technology, and emerging security threats, Subscribe to the channel. This is Applied Tradecraft and Technology. And I'll see you in the next one.